Hello and welcome back to this new video on empirical banking and finance. Today we'll be talking about research questions and how to come up with those questions for your first paper, for your thesis or your dissertation. So research questions, a very good way to start is always to look for real phenomena, for recent developments, for anything that is currently going on in the economy. And right now it would probably be the corona virus pandemic. Almost 12, 13 years ago was a financial crisis. Back in 2001 it was the burst of the dot-com bubble and 9/11. So there's always something going on in the economy that can be used as a topic or as a background for your research questions, and that could be a starting point. And then if you have taken such a recent development, you can ask yourself what could be interesting, what could be going on in the economy, what could be happening, what could be, usually we are looking for problems. For example, we will be looking at firms having liquidity problems right now during the pandemic. We'll be looking at an increased number of firm defaults. We'll be looking at unemployment and government rescue packages, actions by governments to help the economy. So these are all the things that are connected to this recent development, to this real phenomenon, and that could be at least a starting point for coming up with a research question. There is always need to look for the big picture and look at the big picture. Said differently, back then during the Clinton campaign was, it's the economy, stupid. What I want to say with this is that even I did the mistake in my early work to look at some things that seemed to be interesting to me. For example, because I started in quantitative risk management, I looked at correlations and how correlations could be modeled, how correlations could be explained maybe, and that is interesting, but it's not as interesting as the things that come after that. And if we are in finance, and if we are especially in risk management and say in trading, what are we really interested in? We are, for example, an investor, we are a stock market investor, and imagine you're a stock market investor. What would you be interested in? Would you be interested in correlations? No, you're interested in return. You're interested in stock returns, so in the end those correlations need to be transformed into positive and higher stock returns for you. So don't look at correlations per se, but try to analyze effects on stock returns. And with the economy it's the same. Think for a moment, what would you consider to be important outcome variables? That's what we call them, outcome variables. Those are the outcomes we are interested in. What could be important outcome variables in economics? Usually it's unemployment or employment in a positive sense. It's GDP growth, economic growth, employment, inflation, interest rates, investment, capital investments by firms, and usually also innovations like patents, if you measure innovations using patents. So these are the main important outcomes you're looking at in economics. You're not looking at, for example, per se, firm size. We don't care about firm size unless firm size is related to economic growth or employment. And these are the main ingredients you need for your research question. It's also okay to get your inspiration from a nice data set. Now these days, with big data being a top issue in all sciences, we have a lot of data samples and a lot of data sets available to us that are new. Most of them are usually coming from actually Google Trends, Google Scholar, Google Patterns, etc. But if you find a nice data sample, it's totally okay to take that data sample and think about potential research questions that could be analyzed using this data sample. That's actually what many financial economists do. They get their hands on some data sample from, say, a regulator or a central bank, Usually those data samples are highly confidential and are only to be used within the central bank by scientists, for example. And then you have this nice data sample, and then you think about potential research questions you could answer, and usually you could answer for the very first time because now you have the data available. That's okay. If you go to the internet, there are some pretty nice examples for this. One very good example, I think, is a research paper. I guess I need to look that up and put that in the notes, in the slides. There is one nice example for such a nice data sample that is in a paper in the Journal of Financial Economics that looks at the risk aversion and the vanity of managers, of CEOs. And actually there are two papers. One paper looks at DMV data, that is data on car registrations in the USA, and they look up all the cars CEOs are driving. And their hypothesis is that if you're driving a Ferrari, you're have a larger vanity and have a different character as if, for example, you only drive a Toyota or a Fiat. So that's one nice data sample, coming up with the idea of using DMV car registration data and connect this data and match this data to CEO data. And the other data sample I'm thinking of is data on pilot licenses of CEOs. And here the hypothesis is if you have a piloting license, you are much more risk-friendly than a CEO who does not want to fly a plane. Yeah, so these are nice data samples, and in the context of economics, you can first study new research questions. So when you think about your hypothesis and when you think about your research question, also think about maybe new data samples. When you have found your broad research topic, you need to ask questions. This is something I've found with many students. Many students have a problem with this. They always come to me and say, I want to write about this topic. I want to write about that topic. That is okay. But then you immediately have to start to think about questions. And when I ask students, what is your research question? They still say, I'm writing about yada, yada, yada. You're not writing about, you have to answer a question. And the question obviously needs to be unanswered, still unanswered. So this is something you need to keep in mind. And the easiest way to think about this and to come up with a question is a question, very simple one, like, does X cause, effect, change have an effect on Y? So you need to have one explanatory variable X, and you need to have one outcome variable Y. Usually you can have several outcome variables Y, but most of the time you only have one X, you only need one, and you can have several Y's. That's okay. And you need obviously some random economic variables. For example, X could be the number of hours spent on these videos, and Y is your final grade on your bachelor thesis. So very simple example, but think about this for a moment. Now, after having established that X does indeed cause Y, the second most important research question is why. So, for example, think about this as a lab experiment, for example. You want to test whether videos have an effect on bachelor thesis outcomes or maybe on exam outcomes. Now, before the coronavirus pandemic, I would have thought, okay, no one uses videos anyways. There are some MOOCs around, but no one in universities, or actually a very small fraction of professors in universities use these videos. Now with the pandemic, actually this is something that has become very important and very interesting actually. So let's think about this. You want to study whether using videos and the hours spent by students on watching these videos, actually this number has an effect on your outcome, on your grade. Now, you want to explain why is this? Why could it be that X does indeed cause Y? And you can think about different hypotheses. For example, you learn more. Very simple hypothesis. Second problem could be, or second question could be that maybe actually people watching these videos, they perform worse. Why could that be? Because maybe I'm not very good at this. Maybe these videos are actually not very helpful and you spend too much time watching these videos and not learning very much. You could have read a book instead. So that could be a hypothesis. And the first question here is a mere empirical statement. For some reason, there is correlation and hopefully causation between X and Y. The second question is usually sound economic reasoning, sound economic theory. You need to have some idea why X causes Y. And economic theory gives you possible explanations. You have to go to the literature. You need to go through the literature and distill those economic theories that explain why X does indeed cause Y. In this case, obviously, this is not an economics question. This is rather a question for education or even sociology. But in our context, most of the time, we need economic theory. And then we have to study this. One hint, always consider all potential outcomes when it comes to the direction of this effect. It could be that X causes Y with a positive sign. It could be that Y causes X. It could be that X causes Y with a negative sign. And it could be that there is something else driving X and Y. And for this example with these videos and the bachelor thesis grade, I've written down possible explanations. For example, X does indeed cause Y, and there is a positive relation between X and Y. Very simple, you study hard, you learn more, and you earn a better grade. So if you spend time on these videos, yes, there is causation, there's a causal positive effect on your grade. Could be X causes Y, but there is a negative sign on the coefficient in your analysis. Well, videos are useless, valuable time is spent on videos, while you could have made better use of this time, for example, reading books, and the final grade will suffer. Then there could be reverse causality. Y causes X. In a simple regression analysis you've learned in your statistics class, causation isn't detected. You will see a positive coefficient or a negative coefficient, but you are only picking up correlation. I'll come to this back in the next video, but it could be that actually you are showing correlation, but the causation runs from Y to X. Why is that? Well, it could be that you have a better grade, you have maybe you're a very good student, and you're just very diligent. You just think, well, this I have a good grade, I want to have a good grade, and I want to apply for a scholarship, and it might be that it comes in handy if I've watched these videos, for example. So it's not actually related to these videos. So you have reverse causality. And finally, you could have omitted variable bias. There is a third variable, Z, that drives X and that drives Y. So the correlation you're picking up between X and Y is simply a residual spurious correlation that is caused by Z influencing X and Z influencing Y. And we call this an omitted variable bias. What is this? For example, in our example, it could be that the possession of a computer. You need a computer usually, or at least a smartphone. You need a computer to watch these videos. And if you have a computer, you're probably better at writing your thesis. And this is a variable that might be omitted, and you're not thinking about this. So again, it could be you do find correlation between X and Y, but it's not your hypothesis that more videos lead to a better grade. Okay. Now note that this trivial question, watch videos, earn a better grade, suddenly becomes non-trivial due to the pitfalls of empirical research. Everyone can do an OLS regression. Everyone can do a simple regression analysis that picks up some correlation between X and Y, but you need to use more sophisticated methods, and we'll learn about these methods here in this class, to establish that X has a positive or negative effect on Y, and that you can exclude all those alternative explanations. Now, the simpler the research question, usually the better. Some examples from finance. Does higher capital lead to more financial stability? Does more regulation lead to worse bank performance? Are better looking CEOs paid more? We are coming back to this question, and this is not trivial, and this has actually been done by colleagues from Duke University. Are more diverse companies more successful? Do companies that have traded CDS written on them have higher default probabilities? Very simple questions, and this has all been done in research, and we'll talk about this a lot. So when you have finally identified a suitable question, you should make sure that it is still an open question. Go to the literature, go to the internet, check whether anyone has already done this, check whether it is not trivial. For example, an increase in a company's stock will mechanically increase the market cap, the market capitalization. So why should you study this? This is done automatically because this is the way market capitalization is defined. Make sure that you think about the big picture. Think about your outcome variable, Y, and whether it is a relevant economic outcome. For example, bachelor grades means this is one way to measure success in higher education. And higher education is usually related to higher income and more innovation, better work performance. So higher education in terms of bachelor degrees and bachelor theses, this is relevant in education and the economics of education and labor economics. So, of course, X is your bachelor, X is your bachelor grade, whether you achieve your bachelor grade, and Y is your salary later on. So this usually is in labor economics. This is highly relevant, and it is a question that has obviously been studied before, but maybe not in the context with these videos or with online teaching in general. Obviously, you shouldn't use my videos, but you should use more videos or videos in general. And then start thinking about the why and consider all possible explanations, formulate your question and the related research hypotheses, and you should be done. And we've already talked about X causing Y, Y causing X, Z causing X and Y. This is the non-trivial question of establishing causality, and this is what we'll be doing next.